Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Millennial Project. Right now I am on my way up to Malibu, which is about 30 minutes north of where I live in Los Angeles. And I'm headed up there to speak with Carson Bruno, who is an assistant dean at Pepperdine University. Carson has done some really interesting writing about how NIMBYs have been accentuating California's affordable housing crisis. So if you're not familiar with what's going on in California, basically we have a ton of people moving to the state, especially to cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco. The problem is that although you may see a lot of cranes in downtown San Francisco or downtown Los Angeles, we aren't actually building enough housing stock. And so the result is that prices for housing are going up. Where NIMBYs come into the mix is that they tend to want to block development that could potentially alleviate this affordable housing crisis. So things like high density apartments, things like affordable housing complexes, sometimes even senior housing complexes, but it also goes as far out as public transportation stops and a variety of other things that are crucial to building kind of well-functioning, sustainable, and inclusive 21st century cities. So with that in mind, I think this will be a really interesting interview. I think this is a really relevant and timely issue, and I'm excited to dive into everything more once we get up to Pepperdine in just a few minutes. Okay, so we are here today with Carson Bruno. I just wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself, and then we can chat a little bit about NIMBYism and residentialism and what's going on with that in California.
Great. I'm Carson Bruno, Assistant Dean at the School of Public Policy at Pepperdine University. And NIMBYism, residentialism, and affordable housing, particularly in the state of California, are becoming much more of an issue. It's an issue that really local governments, regional governments, and the state really need to be paying attention to because it has a huge impact on its citizens as well as the state's economy.
So where did this residentialist-NIMBY movement come from, and what does it look like today?
So NIMBYism by itself isn't necessarily a problem. It's something that communities across the country, across the world always deal with. NIMBYism, or not in my backyard, is essentially not wanting developments or big projects right in your immediate community or neighborhood. It's not anti-development. It's not anti-growth per se. What has happened in California, particularly in the more coastal communities in California, is NIMBYism has really merged with residentialism. And residentialism is very anti-growth, very anti-development. Residentialism came out of Palo Alto in the 1960s, where they really wanted to preserve the culture and intrinsic feel of their neighborhood and community at the time that those individuals bought into that community. So it's the ideas of keeping Palo Alto as it was in 1962. Single-family homes, very small, very suburban. That is now really starting to butt heads up against a new, modern, growing, rapidly growing California, especially along the coastal communities.
So, I mean, a lot of times we think of local or community-based or grassroots as really good, positive things, and I think a lot of times, most of the time it is, but this is a weird situation where it kind of is twisted in a way, it sounds like, where sometimes this rhetoric of local, community-based, sustainable could be kind of co-opted for maybe purposes that wouldn't be great for urban development in the long term. Would you be able to elaborate on that a little bit and tell us how that works?
Definitely. This is probably one of the hardest political problems with the residentialist NIMBYism movement. It doesn't fall neatly along any sort of partisan lines. Republicans, Democrats, socialist, communist, libertarian, you'll find them all in kind of the residentialist NIMBYism movement because it is very localized, because it is very community-based. And in the United States, zoning issues, land use regulations, land use decisions have always been done at a very local level. Therefore, it's very easy for community members to really kind of want to put up proverbial fences, proverbial gates around their community because they want to protect what they view as their community. This has rippling effects, though. What happens here in Malibu affects people living in Santa Monica or Ventura. What the city of Los Angeles does obviously has massive impacts on what the surrounding cities and unincorporated parts of Los Angeles County are doing. So while historically, politically, land use decisions have been made at a local level, we need to really start thinking of housing as a much more regional situation or a mega regional situation.
So what does the NIMBY toolkit look like? I know you've talked about that before. I thought it was really interesting. I've done some work on the Hollywood sign. Some of what you mentioned in your article, as we talked about before, you not knowing much about the Hollywood sign at all, seemed to resonate with the situation going on there. So would you be able to describe, what that toolkit looks like and how these people kind of influence local governments to do what they want? Again, maybe against what would be long-term goals for sustainable urban development.
Definitely. So, development always needs to be looking very long-term, very forward-thinking. Why is that the case? Because development takes time to happen. Even if you got rid of all the permitting processes, all of the environmental reviews, it still takes time to construct buildings. So one of the biggest issues with the residentialist NIMBYism movement is that it further elongates an already very long process and frustrates a very long process to the point where a lot of times it kills the process entirely. So how do they do this? The first step is misinformation. They perpetrate misinformation. This can come in the form of kind of creating strawmen of why the problem exists. In the case of affordable housing, the new target has been Airbnb and other short-term rental platforms, claiming that those platforms are taking units off the market, and that's why prices are increasing, not because of this artificial supply restriction caused by NIMBYism and residentialism. Or it can come in the form of exasperating or trying to grow the problems that could stem from further development. So if you increase high-density housing in an area, you're obviously going to create a traffic problem. So they try to exasperate that problem, make it seem bigger than it actually is, or make it seem like there's no possible policy solution to that problem, which is actually quite false. So that's the first step. That's misinformation. The second step is then co-opting the political process. And they can do this through a number of different avenues, a lot of times all of the above. They will get their own members elected to political office, and that for that city government, that county board of supervisors, special district, whatever it may be, or get their members appointed to the local planning, development, environmental review commissions that advise the elected officials on how to proceed with development issues, they will just flood those council meetings, commission meetings, hearings with their members, making it seem like they're the only voices that really have a stake in this situation. In politics, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. They really play this up in the process.
So do you think that a lot of these residentialist NIMBYs are expanding their influence kind of beyond their numbers by doing this type of stuff? Or do you think that they really, in most cases, are representing, the kind of wider perspective in the community, if that makes any sense?
They are absolutely a political minority in many of these communities. Most people are fine with development, and because in most cases, the development goes through a very lengthy process already. A developer has to come before the city council, which then redirects it to a commission that gets reviewed. In many cases, especially in larger cities, there are multiple commissions that have to review these plans before they actually even then go back to the city council for final approval. So there's a lot of review processes occurring already built into the system. What NIMBYism and residentialism does is try to make their numbers seem larger than they actually are.
In California, there is the California Environmental Quality Act, correct? CEQA. How does this factor into the NIMBY toolkit? I know you've written a lot about this, so I'm very interested.
CEQA abuse is rampant up and down California. CEQA was first signed by then Governor Ronald Reagan. So has a very long history in the state of California. And it was meant to ensure that all projects, whether public or private, get the appropriate environmental impact reviews done. The way that the law was structured to ensure that the state government wasn't overburdened with policing this law was what is called a private right of action. Essentially, it makes anyone, whether they have standing or not in the project, a potential person to sue on behalf of CEQA. So this has become a very powerful tool to kind of get your political way in the state of California on development issues as well as a whole number of other issues. So it is either a tool of last resort for residentialists and NIMBYism, or part of something that they use in the misinformation stage or co-opting the political process stage, that they just really kind of hold up the environmental review and the permitting process by appealing decisions being made, by requiring new environmental impact reports being issued, to claiming that environmental impact reports are insufficient. And so it really, again, elongates the entire process. The goal here is to stall, stall, stall in the hope of eventually killing.
So does this kind of residentialist NIMBY blocking of projects, does it tend to affect people of lower income levels, or is it kind of a general impact across the board, all income levels?
The hardest hit definitely are those in the lowest income, those who could qualify for a lot of affordable housing subsidies or affordable housing projects. However, because of constraints on the state government and on the federal government, new affordable housing units aren't really being put into the pipeline as readily. So it really eats up their supply. So they need to go into the normal housing markets to be able to find housing. So yes, it puts them at the biggest disadvantage. But it goes all the way up the income spectrum. Places like Silicon Valley, here in the greater Los Angeles area, people who have, 2 full-time, very high-paid jobs are now finding themselves priced out of the housing market, having to look to live further and further away from where they may work, where 10, 15, 20 years ago, they could afford a very nice living within the main economic core of those 2 regions. So while the low-income individuals and families are definitely the hardest hit, you're now starting to see middle-income to upper middle-income families and individuals hit hard as well.
So if people want to look on the internet and maybe find some more of your work, if they want to read some of what you've written, where is a good place for them to go to connect with you?
Definitely. So I have a monthly column on Real Clear Markets. You can see some stuff I've written on this topic and other topics there, as well as I do put out a monthly newsletter called the California Real Politic. And if you'd like to subscribe to that, you can either follow me on Twitter at CarsonJFBruno or email me.
Sounds great. I'll make sure I put that in the description of the video, and hopefully people will be able to connect with your work a little bit.
Excellent. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.